moving back to the post-apocalypse after a little fantasy interlude, and making a kind of saloon type building, again in a kind of Wild West style. And to start with, grabbing a foam core base, and beveling the edges, and assembling a template for the rough shape of the building. And going for a kind of square shape with a cut-off corner. Also indented the door and cut a window out. I then used a few pieces of off-cut foam to provide a bit of extra strength and support for the roof. Using some plastic mesh from a garden centre, I trimmed it to size and attached it behind the window, so you'd have a wire mesh behind it. To match the other buildings I've done, I cut some wooden balsa planks, and just chipped away a few bits with a knife, and glued them as some boardwalk on the front of the building. This also meant I had to extend the base a bit with a few more offcuts of foam core. I then lined the edges of the door frame and the window with some pieces of cardboard. After attaching the roof, I proceeded to clad the building in a mixture of balsa wood, corrugated cardboard and textured card. So with the corrugated cardboard, trying to keep that into kind of square and rectangular shapes, as well as just plastering all over the building. There were also some old plastic bases I had from some historicals, so I glued those on as sort of thicker kind of armor plates, and attached a large one on the side to become a notice board later. This also makes a good surface if you want to add some graffiti later. Going around the edge, I then attached some pieces extending over the top to provide some cover, and make it a bit more fun from a playable perspective. To add some character, I took a sculpting tool and started twisting some various bullet holes in. For a staircase on the side, I trimmed 2 balsa wood beams to size and then drilled a hole through the both of them so I could attach a cocktail stick peg. Then trimming some plasticard down to size, use that as these steps. Then on the underside, securing that with some hot glue, which is not pretty, but seeing as it's the underside, it won't be particularly visible. This was then attached with more hot glue to the side of the building. To add some more visual storytelling, I scuffed up some balsa wood beams and built some rectangles on the roof of the building to become some kind of plant beds where someone is trying, probably unsuccessfully, to grow some extra vegetation. Moving on to the basing paste, I used my standard recipe and applied that on the edges as well as in the plant beds and anywhere I wanted there to be some dirt build-up, such as on the roof or in the edges of the building on the planking. Before that had the chance to dry, I took the opportunity to push some small rocks into the base as well. To add an irrigation system, I cut some cocktail sticks to size and pushed them into the paste as well. For the front doors, I used 3 bits of plasticard and drilled some bullet holes in using a pin vise. I then attached some cocktail sticks over the front of the door, again using the pin vise to drill a hole through into the foam. then scuffed up a piece of corrugated cardboard and attached it over the front of these beams. I initially wanted covering over all the boarding on the base, but I decided that would cut off too much of the notice board and the window, so just went over the door instead. And I gave the entire thing a coating of black gesso to prime it. Using some pieces of balsa, I then made a stepping platform underneath the notice board as well. And going in with a mid-brown paint, gave the entire thing another base coat. To make it a bit more colourful, once the brown was down, I got some green and some red paint, and went over a few select panels, to give the impression that they'd been taken from different places. Given it's the holiday season, it felt like red and green was a nice festive choice, but the red did turn out to be more orange than I had expected. Moving on to the metallic stage, using an old piece of sponge from a pair of shoes, and I mixed together two metallic paints, a silver and a tin, and then started dabbing that over all the metallic blades. And you can get some nice effects by rotating and using different areas of the sponge to mix up the pattern you get, and also varying how many times you dab a specific piece of the plating can make it look more or less worn. Mixing together a pale sand colour, I then hit all the wooden planks, as well as use it as a dry brush on the ground texture. While all that was drying, I made a few little walkways out of some balsa wood planks, and then started doing some decoration in the plant beds. So using some lichen or reindeer moss, depending on where you are, I nipped it up into small pieces and glued it down using Mod Podge. Then to put some coverings on one, used some paper clips, bent them into half ovals, and then drilled some holes for them in each end of the balsa wood beams. I then built a little wooden platform, using cocktail sticks as wooden dowels, and a pin vise to drill some guidelines for them. Finally, using another plastic base and drilling some more bullet holes in, I made a signpost for above the main door, and using some hot glue, attached that into place. For the notice board, I had some paper left over from where I make the autumnal leaves, and this is just regular paper that's been dyed in watered down paint, and using a ballpoint pen very lightly to do some very faint scribbles over it. I then sliced these using a sharp knife into rough rectangular shapes and attached them to the notice board using matte Mod Podge. I started off by putting them mostly in an ordered fashion, and then layering them up over each other, and making them a bit wrinkled by folding them up. So there was some variation. Also attached one at the base where it had fallen off and been trampled underfoot. Using some Sharpies, I added some graffiti onto the back of the building, and this is where it pays to have some of the kind of plain plates as well as the corrugated and textured materials as well. I found a good way to do graffiti is to do a random blob of colour, then outline it in black and pick out a few characters inside. And then you get something that looks a bit like it's been sprayed on. Adding a bit more weathering onto the building, grab the pale sand colour again, and dry brushed it over the lower half of the buildings, as well as in any recesses where it would pool up. For the main sign, initially started with a thin point pen, before going over it again in a thicker Sharpie. This bit is probably easier to do before you add any bullet holes, as you can end up falling into them with the pen. I also roughed up the edges by gently dabbing them with the end of the marker. And that was the building done. So it had a topper, which was a small thing I threw together at the last minute, as well as some wooden stands and platforms, so you can get a few different variations on the loadout. And I left it mostly open so it is still very playable. And it also combines quite nicely with the previous building, and I quite like the kind of Wild West style where you have these kind of front boardwalks and these kind of square buildings, but you then also have the roofs that you can use and are very accessible as well. Then you can add a few of the market stalls, and you have something approaching a complete street. So I reckon another 4 or 5 buildings, and the town will probably be done. But anyway, thanks for watching guys, and I hope to catch you next time.